The B-17 bomber was a massive, four-engine heavy bomber used by the Allies in the Pacific theater of World War II. Designed for high-altitude strategic bombing, it was capable of carrying a large payload of bombs over long distances, heavily armed with 13 machine guns around its body, and could sustain heavy damage, earning the nickname Flying Fortress. However, despite its formidable capabilities, flying on a mission in the B-17 over the vast expanses of the Pacific was a terrifying, extremely dangerous, and horrific experience, with each mission being a journey to hell and back if you were lucky enough to return. Today, we will describe the dangers faced by the crews of these machines on their extremely risky missions, why it was so horrifying to fly in them, and the immense courage displayed by these crews, who often paid the ultimate price. When the B-17 bomber proved its worth in 1943 during the long-range raids against Japanese-held island strongholds like Rabaul, it was a true engineering miracle for its era.
It was vastly larger than most tactical aircraft operating in the Pacific, with greatly enhanced endurance. But for the 10 men inside, every second spent in the sky was miles away from comfort or safety, and several crew positions were purely nightmare-inducing. The B-17 was designed to cruise at altitudes reaching 25,000 feet, but the fuselage was completely unpressurized. At that extreme height, the air is too thin to sustain human life, forcing the entire crew to rely on crude oxygen masks. Temperatures inside the uninsulated aluminum hull routinely plummeted to -50 degrees Celsius. To survive, crew members wore heavy, electrically heated flight suits. If an aviator was wounded by enemy fire, his blood would instantly freeze upon contact with the sub-zero air, sometimes brutally sealing the wound and preventing him from bleeding out. However, if a suit short-circuited or an oxygen line snapped, a crew member would quietly lose consciousness within 30 seconds and suffer fatal brain damage or death in under 5 minutes if unnoticed.
Furthermore, touching bare metal inside the sub-zero cabin would immediately freeze human skin to the structure. Clearing a jammed machine gun without thick gloves often resulted in severe frostbite or lost fingers. While the B-17 was an exceptionally stable platform, its survival relied heavily on flying in massive, dense formations known as combat boxes. This tactical arrangement allowed the bomber's defensive machine guns to overlap, creating an almost impenetrable wall of fire against intercepting fighters. Yet, veteran crews agreed that assembling these giant formations over foggy island airfields was often more nerve-wracking than the target run itself. Dozens of heavily loaded bombers had to take off every 20 seconds into low cloud cover, blind to one another. Training accidents alone claimed the lives of over 2,200 airmen during formation practice throughout the war. While flying through unpredictable ocean storms was a constant threat, the primary danger came from Japanese air defenses.
Major Japanese garrisons were heavily fortified with high-altitude anti-aircraft weaponry, most notably the dreaded 88mm Type 99 dual-purpose guns. These cannons were massed around vital harbors and oil refineries, capable of hurling explosive flak shells up to 30,000 feet. The shells were set with timed fuses to detonate mid-air, showering the sky with thousands of razor-sharp shrapnel fragments. Because the B-17's outer skin was thin aluminum, even a non-direct explosion could slice through hydraulic lines, sever control cables, or decapitate crew members. Watching neighboring fortresses take a direct hit to the bomb bay and disintegrate into a fireball without a single parachute opening inflicted unimaginable psychological trauma on the surviving airmen.
If the flak didn't tear the formation apart, enemy interceptors were waiting. Japanese fighter squadrons flying nimble Mitsubishi A6M0s and heavily armed Nakajima K-84s were scrambled from nearby island airstrips.
They quickly learned to exploit the B-17's vulnerabilities, favoring high-speed, head-on diving attacks aimed directly at the cockpit and nose bubble, or striking from below to hit the vulnerable engines. Equipped with deadly 20mm wing cannons, a single, well-placed burst could ignite the bomber's high-octane fuel tanks. Early in the Pacific campaign, Allied fighter escorts like the P-40 Warhawk lacked the fuel capacity to protect the bombers all the way to distant targets. It wasn't until late 1944, with the arrival of ultra-long-range P-51D Mustangs and P-47N Thunderbolts, that bomber loss rates finally began to fall. Inside the aircraft, the environment was claustrophobic and chaotic.
10 men, weighed down by bulky cold-weather gear, heavy flak jackets, steel helmets, and emergency parachute harnesses, had to maneuver through narrow metal catwalks. The average age of a B-17 crewman was barely 21 years old, and their statistical chance of completing a full 25-mission tour without being shot down or killed was tragically low. Every position had its unique horror. The tail gunner spent up to 10 hours kneeling on a metal frame in a tiny, freezing glass bubble at the very rear of the aircraft. Meanwhile, the waist gunner stood at open fuselage windows, exposed to a 150-mile-per-hour sub-zero slipstream, while swinging heavy .50 caliber machine guns, standing on floors slick with spent shell casings and ice. The top turret gunner stood on a platform directly behind the pilot, his head inside a clear plexiglass dome that offered a 360-degree view, making him a prime target for head-on fighter strafing runs. But the most terrifying post on the aircraft belonged to the ball turret gunner.
Suspended underneath the belly of the bomber in a cramped, sperry metal sphere, the gunner sat folded into a fetal position for hours. Because space inside the sphere was so tight, he could not wear a parachute. It had to be left inside the main cabin above him. The turret relied on an electro-hydraulic system to rotate the hatch alignment so the gunner could climb back inside the fuselage. If combat damage cut power to the hydraulics, the gunner was trapped in his glass bubble. In the horrific event of a belly landing with jammed gear, the trapped ball turret gunner would be crushed underneath the weight of the belly as the bomber skidded across the runway. Up front, the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier worked in high-stress synchronization amidst blaring alarms and smoke.
If the bomber took severe damage but remained controllable, the pilots would fight the controls to keep the plane level, attempting to reach an emergency landing strip on a nearby friendly atoll or ditch in the ocean. Ditching a heavy B-17 into rough ocean waves was notoriously dangerous. The aircraft often broke apart on impact, giving the crew only seconds to scramble into life rafts before the heavy metal hull sank into the abyss. If forced to bail out over enemy-controlled islands, airmen faced capture by hostile forces, where tropical diseases, brutal interrogation, and harsh captivity awaited them. Flying the B-17 Fortress required a level of heroism that is difficult to fathom today. A daily battle against extreme cold, mechanical failure, flak, and deadly interceptors, where surviving the day was the only reward.